Hello, Swaddy Cup, and welcome to the ASEAN Game. I'm your host, Ryan Walters, coming to you from the still quite warm streets of Bangkok with one eye on the final rounds of the Thai League season and another miles and miles and miles and miles away with the last ever AFC Cup Final set to take place this weekend in Oman between Al Ahed and Central Coast Mariners. Here once again, as always this time, to talk about all things Muscat. And no, that's not Kevin, it's James Dodd. James, welcome back.
Hey Ryan, good to be back.
Eventually, we'll not talk about Central Coast Mariners on this show, but we're doing it now because they're carrying the ASEAN flag into the final, and that looked a little dicey in the second leg of the interzone final in the first half, where it was a bit of a nail biter in a lot of ways. There wasn't a ton going on in that first half where it was scoreless, and then in the 77th minute, an 18-year-old Miguel DiPizio steps up and puts the Mariners in front. A couple of goals were added later. We'll talk about that. But how great of a story is it to have an 18-year-old step up and send them into the final?
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. And do you know the best thing about Miguel DiPizio coming on and scoring that goal is that he actually scored probably the most crucial goal in the Mariners AFC Cup campaign earlier on in the group stage, where it went to the last match. I think it was against Terengganu, if memory serves me well. And he scored. They were losing 1-0 in that game, and he came off the bench and bagged the equaliser, which then meant that they were back in pole position to top the group and therefore get to the position ultimately that they are now. So Miguel DiPizio is a real prodigious young talent, and he's proved that in this campaign. It's been a really good, I suppose, breeding ground for Mark Jackson to utilise the younger members of his squad, and he's done really, really well. I mean, Ronald Barcelus is another young player who came mid-season, who kind of got the credit for scoring the late goal against MacArthur that sent them through. But, you know, ultimately, I don't think the Mariners would potentially be in the position they're in now had Miguel DiPizio not scored earlier on in the tournament. So it's a really, really good night in Gosford. It's a good crowd, and as we'll come on to it to talk about, I'm sure it's just ultimately it's just the latest step in what could be a very, very memorable season, not just for the Mariners, but for Australian football in general.
Yeah, there's a ton of potential there, and we'll get to this in a little bit as well, but it's just the third time that an Aussie club is in an Asian final, so massive ramifications there for them, and like you say, for A-League men's in general. And that you could sense the elation when that goal went in, because nobody wanted extra time. Nobody wanted that, not with the amount of travel and everything else. So the goal itself was great, but then when Dhaka added the second just less than 10 minutes later and really kind of put things to bed, I think that's when you could really feel the crowd come into things and really feel the crowd realizing what was happening. And then DiPizio stepped up and got another one, bagged a brace in stoppage time. So just the scenes that we would want for a semifinal. You know, we talked about this before the second leg. Would there be a good crowd? And I think the answer was yes. And the celebrations in the corner, it was amazing. It was great to see. And you were there. How loud was it? What was it like being in the stadium for that?
Yeah, it was a brilliant night, and actually, what really helped, and it sounds really basic. We've discussed this before. The weather actually played its part that night, because a lot of the home games they've had real torrential rain. You know, thunderstorms, lightning. As I said before in a previous pod, lightning hit a crane when I was there about an hour and a half before kickoff once. So that all those things kind of factored into it. But it was a brilliant night, and as you say, when Miguel DiPizio came on and really sort of settled the nerves, if you like, because, you know, the longer that game went on, you always feel as though the team that's kind of hanging in there for the 90 minutes, if you were, which Abdi Shatter were to a certain extent in the leg in Gosford, they probably get more of a boost going to extra time than the home side does, because, you know, their aim is to sort of sit off a bit and then try and pick them off on a counter. And the more the home side presses and looks for that equaliser and tries to force the issue, then the more likely is they could get caught on the counter. So when DiPizio scored, there was just this relief all around the stadium. And during the game, I was sat in the media box with a couple of the social media guys from the Mariners, and just the relief, the screams when DiPizio scored, and you could see, and obviously you could see it on the benches as well. Normally, Mark Jackson is a pretty relaxed character on the bench. Maybe he shouts at his own players here and there, but he doesn't tend to sort of, you know, prowl up and down his technical area and stuff like that. He's quite measured, and you just saw the what it meant to them when that goal went in. The fact that they knew. I think once that goal went in, they knew that Abdishatta would have to come out and would have to press for the equaliser, and then they knew they had them where they wanted them then. But just some little things, like it was just the game, to sum it up as a whole, was quite mad. I mean, the Abdishatta team actually arrived in Australia before the Mariners did, because they had such a problem getting back because of the flooding at Dubai International Airport. The Mariners, their return journey was crazy. And the fact that the opposition were actually back in their home country before they were, albeit without their kit, which I'm sure fans would have seen online, there was a big problem there. I know the coach was quite pleased because his suitcase arrived, and I think he had a lot of cigarettes in his suitcase because he didn't like Australia. So he was a great character, the coach, speaking to him before and after, and all those things. They had to speak to the president of the club, and then the fans who travelled over from Kyrgyzstan. There was a great travelling support. They actually bought the kit. It was last season's kit for the Abdish team to play in. So all of those things, they had to go to Rebel Sports, which is a sort of sports superstore here in Australia. It's a chain in Australia. They had to go and buy kit to train in. So there was all of these little things that people were kind of unaware of that were leading into the game. But it was just a typical AFC Cup, brilliant drama-filled evening. And it resulted in the Mariners getting the job done.
This is what we want. This is why we watch these tournaments, is a team showing up and having to play in last year's kits. And that human element, they shop at the same stores as us to get that training gear.
Yeah.
Love that side of it. And boy, like you say, though, I thought they played a pretty solid game in the first half, especially, in most of the second half. It's one, though, where, look, cliches are cliches for a reason. We talk about this all the time. If you're setting up not to lose, then you're not really going to win. And I think they kind of tried to suffocate the match for far too long in this one. And we talked a lot about the stats after the first leg, where the Mariners only had 34% possession. And I think that was purposeful from Abdishatta this time. And they still had the majority of possession in this one. They had 64%, Abdishatta did. But you could see that it was more, to me, it felt like it was more the Mariners kind of allowing the game to kind of come to them and rest their legs a little bit, which I think is somewhat counterintuitive if the other team have the ball. But I think they were just kind of like, we're just going to have a low block. You're not going to score in the first half. We're going to rest a bit and then come out. And I think that was how I read this. I also had an eye in Yokohama at the time as well. You were there. Was that how this one was playing out?
I think so. And one thing that leads me down that path to agree with what you're saying is something that Mark Jackson said to me before the game. And I asked him about essentially what he wanted to see that was different in the second leg to what he saw in the first. And he said it was what they did with the ball. And now that doesn't mean to say that he wanted them to have the ball all the time, because if you look at the Mariners' average possession stats this year, it's slightly a tick under 50% anyway. So it's not as if they're a team that is constantly dominating possession of the ball. They're more a side that creates a volume of chances when they have possession. They make it count, and the number of chances, not necessarily, it's a bit more quantity over quality, but I think their viewing is that the more chances we create, the more likely we are to score. So I think that was how I looked at this game. Abdishatta were very, very content on breaking the game up, if you like, when they did lose possession. Tactical fouls here. The referee, the Korean refs were pretty lenient, I think, with some challenges on both sides. I know there was a terrible tackle on Max Ballard, which on the replays could well have been a red card, and that would have blown the game wide open. But I think Jackson said afterwards as well, the fact that they've played so many games in recent weeks, and the AFC Cup games are so important to them, but naturally they're fighting on now 3 fronts, really, because they've just clinched the Premiership title, the first part of the sort of the double they're hoping to do domestically. But knowing that Wellington Phoenix, the other team in the A-League who were vying for that top spot, were just continuing to win, it meant the Mariners they can't afford to rest players. Essentially, they have to keep playing the same starting 11. Maybe he changes the number 9 for Alu Kual or Jing Reese or Ryan Edmondson every so often, but by and large, the team is pretty much the same. So I think you're absolutely spot on. The fact that he wanted them to do more with the ball when they had the ball rather than just try and keep it for keeping its sake means that it did enable them to rest. And you obviously, there's a phrase that I've heard Mark Jackson use a lot this season. It's resting defense. And he shouts it all the time to Dan Hall and Brian Kantak and Storm Rue if he's playing at right back, or Mikael Docker, or if those two are playing on the fullbacks, or Jacob Farrell. And it's essentially is push up. When we don't have the ball, push up, because I want you to be constantly focused on the fact that if we turn it over and they break, then you're ready and you're in the right position. And you can see that sometimes there's maybe a want on their behalf to sort of think, well, we've got the ball, we're high up the pitch, we're okay where we are. And you can see Mark Jackson's not happy with that. He wants them to be on the halfway line and ready to pounce. And I think that is a natural, to round it off, I think it also means that the Mariners this year they've now become accustomed to playing so many games. And I think it's one of those where if you switch off and you start to sort of maybe drop the levels of not concentration, but energy and your engagement in the game, then I think that's when they could maybe come unstuck. And I think that's what Mark Jackson wanted. He wanted them to be push through those energy levels, push through that pain. If there's pain there, tight muscles and soreness, keep going. And we play the way we play and we'll win games. And that's ultimately what happened, because I think Abdi Shatter probably ran out of steam towards the end. And as you said, when that first goal went in, I think that was the killer, because I just didn't see them having anything in the tank to pull one back.
Yeah, no, not on a lot of tired legs out on that pitch. And I think that was showing in the first half, especially. I think definitely in the second half. And if we would have went to extra time, that would have been some walking football there. We would have seen that would have been pretty rough for everybody. And you were talking about making more of possession, and that they did. In the first match, they had only 4 shots with 2 on target. Second leg, they had 10 shots with 7 on target. So just like you were saying in the first leg, just more volume, more chances. And of those 7 on target, 3 went in. They also had 3 corners in this one. So they were just doing more moving forward. And it really worked out. And it's the potential for a very historic season for them. And since that fateful evening, which, by the way, was last week. So for folks listening now, we're recording on a Friday just before the final. That was 10 days ago. Since then, they've played 2 league matches. And as you said, Wellington has been right there. So they've had to win those. They did win those. They've been crowned premiers. And we're going to talk about the congestion and everything else. But first and foremost, let's just talk about what an achievement this is for the Mariners, especially considering this club was in question for existence not that long ago. And just cementing that legacy and cementing the fact that there will be a team here moving forward. How much does the premiership mean to the club?
It's enormous. It's enormous. And you're so true when you say about, question marks over the license that the club holds. And actually, weirdly enough, there was the same question marks over Wellington Phoenix probably 4 years ago now. Should they still be in the league? Are they contributing? They're always towards the bottom of the ladder. The crowds aren't great. Those were the same question marks over the Mariners. And for them to steal the premiership on Wednesday night, that was the first time in 12 years that they've finished top of the pile, if you like, before going into the final series. And don't forget, probably 4 or 5 years ago, this was a club that had Usain Bolt on trial.
Yes.
And it was a marketing gimmick, and it was, by and large, it was widely sort of ridiculed, really, as a club that were thinking, what on earth is going on here? They had the coach at the time, Mike Mulvey, who I think was on a record losing run with the club, and almost had a record losing run for the A-League in history. And to fast forward and see where they are now, champions from last year that nobody picked before the start of the season. Premiers with a coach under Mark Jackson, who was taken over at the start of the year. Nick Montgomery left and did an amazing job. They lost the likes of Sam Silvera, Benny Nkololo, Nectar Triantis, Jason Cummings, all players that were first-team regulars last year that played a massive role in that championship trophy for the Mariners. They lost their first 4 games of the season. No club has ever lost 4 games straight in the title defense and gone on to win the premiership. So this is the job that they've done, and he's got a great coaching staff around him, Mark Jackson. And I think if you just look at the fact that they've been able to juggle this competition, I think they've done close to 100,000 kilometers in travel since they've been in the AFC Cup. Not to mention, sort of backing it up to then go to, Newcastle away on a weekend after they beat Abdi Shatter in this game that we were talking about in the second leg of the interzonal final, which is not a final, it's actually to then have to go straight away to the home of their fiercest rivals, the Newcastle Jets, on the following weekend. I think they had about 3 days turnaround, realistically 2 days, to then go there and win, beat the biggest rivals, to put the pressure back on Wellington Phoenix, who were playing at the same time, who had won. They had to win. And then going into a standalone game against an Adelaide side, which is so dangerous. I was there on Wednesday night, and it was absolutely pouring rain in Gosford. It was a tricky night for football. To get the job done like they did, this club is they're flying. They're absolutely flying. Everything they do at the moment is based on a good decision, which is then reaping the rewards of a previous good decision. They're just in such a sweet spot at the moment with the youth products that they're bringing through, the players that they're selling, the players that they're bringing in. Angel Torres is unavailable at the moment. He's been stood down due to a legal issue. But prior to that, he looked to have been a good signing with his input on the pitch, the goals he was scoring, the games he was contributing. Then before that, you look at the fact that they lost their arguably their best player, left in January, Marco Tullio.
Yeah.
So it's a consequence. The Mariners is a consequence of every good decision that was made by people like Matt Simon, who's a club legend, who's now the sporting director. But then to go on a slight tangent, they're a club where every single person matters, because every single person at the club does 2 different roles. So at the Mariners training ground, there's kind of a sporting facility that they've built there, which is like a gym, which is like a high performance center. That was built by Matt Simon. Matt Simon literally actually built and put the gym together and everything, in the scaffolding and the canopy and everything like that. He built it. He painted the clubhouse. Like, this is the sort of club the Mariners are. And you can see that when everybody pulls in the direction like they are at a club like the Mariners, this is, and to have them in a position now where they're in an AFC Cup final, which is, they're on the cusp of history. They're going for a treble all up. Like, it's just an amazing, amazing story.
Please tell me that was a cat.
It was a cat.
Outstanding. Yeah. How have we done? Okay, so, and this is staying in the pod, by the way. I don't know how many times we've done this. You haven't mentioned there's a cat in the background. What are we even doing? How are we not getting the cat to predict this thing? I'll stay focused. I'll stay focused. I don't know. My Instagram algorithm knows how much I like cats. I don't know if the footballing world that I'm a part of knows all about that, but it's a thing. Cats are great. But we'll focus on the football for now. We'll come back for Fluffy Weekly. That's a different podcast. Ooh, that sounds like a different podcast. Anyway, let's talk about football. We'll just transition seamlessly back into it. Like you say, right now everything is absolutely flying for the Mariners. And the question that I have, and we all know what adrenaline can do for the human body and how it can carry you through, but will they have enough in the tank this weekend? Because that is an intense couple of weeks to come back from, like you're saying, come back from Kyrgyzstan, go over to Newcastle, come back, play all these games, win all these games. And yes, it's amazing, but also celebrations, that emotion and everything and what that does to the body, it takes it out of you. So they've had all of these massive, massive celebrations, rightly earned, amazing to see them. Now, how do they have it in them to ramp back up one more time for this final? And again, things aren't even done then, because like you say, the playoffs are coming. So like this is another massive elation potentially, and then back to business. But like you said, I think maybe they're getting used to that, but like physically, can they do this weekend?
It's a great question, because I know they've already flown out. Obviously we're recording this on a Friday. They flew out on Thursday afternoon, early afternoon yesterday, to go to Oman. So I think one thing that is so clear and has become clearer throughout the season under Mark Jackson is that they have a process and they stick to that process. Whether it's a a one-off knockout game against MacArthur FC, whether it's a home game against Perth Glory in the A-League. It's the way that they have tried to structure their team this year, and that's both players and coaching staff, is that Mark Jackson says that they are accountable. Every single person is accountable. So the coaching staff, whether it's Andreas, one of his assistants who does the set pieces, or whether it's Brian Kaltak, or whether it's, Danny Vukovic in goal, they are all responsible, that nobody blames anybody else if there's a mistake. It's kind of your mistake is our mistake, essentially, and your good work is our good work. So I think Mark has proved, I believe, this season that they don't seem to get too excited by things in a good way. I don't think they get over jubilant. For example, when they beat Wellington Phoenix 2-1 at home in Gosford, which is essentially the game which has won them the league, really, because they won it by having more points, but also if it went to level on points, they would have won by care of having more wins. So after that game, you would have been forgiven to see them celebrating on the pitch with the fans. They didn't really do that. They always go around and thank the fans when they go around, full time, win, lose or draw. They always do that. But they're a level-headed team, and there's no ego in that team. And I think that is vital going into a game like this, because there's going to be nerves for sure. And many people would say maybe arguably the Mariners are favourites for this AFC Cup final game. But I think the fact that they've remained level-headed and they've not got above their station, or they've not even got complacent when they're heavy favourites for a game in the league this season, I think will hold them in really good stead. I mean, I remember not too long ago, there was a game where they played Western United away, and it looked on paper, Western have been towards the bottom of the league all season. They finished third bottom of the league. I think it was second or third bottom. Yet Mark Jackson's message the whole way through, and he even said it in the pre-game interview that he did, and I remember this. They said, you're coming here, you're in great form, you must be relishing this. And the first thing Mark Jackson said was, well, if you look at the recent form table, Western United are in the top 4 in recent form. So we're not, this is not an easy game. Don't be tricked into thinking this is an easy game because we've won 3 or 4 in a row and they're towards the bottom of the ladder. And I think it's that kind of mindset, that the fact that that's the first thing that he's thinking of is that there's no stone unturned with Mark. There's no complacency. There's no, we can just cruise for here because I feel like we know what we're doing. Tactically we know what we're doing. The team is set up. And I think that is so important for a team like the Mariners, because the minute that they take their eye off the ball slightly, or maybe lose focus in what it is that they're trying to achieve or what they're trying to do in certain situations in games, set pieces, as I said, or a game plan in general, I think they will come unstuck. And I think he knows that. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. I think he knows that the minute any team takes their eye off the ball or takes somebody for granted, that's when you will get punished, whether it be for a set piece or something like that. So I think the fact that they didn't over-celebrate again the other night after clinching the Premiership title. They had their celebrations, but that was more for the supporters rather than them. I don't think they're not going to be going out on having a few beers afterwards or anything like that. I think they're very much process-driven. This is box 1 ticked. There's still 2 more boxes to go. I think that's the way they're approaching it.
Yeah, and you're leading in perfectly here, because this is, look, we always talk about Western Sydney, as we should, because they beat Al Hilal, which I think it's massive. It can't be overstated how big 2014 was. And AFC Cup is not ACL, but this could be a massive moment, a watershed moment for Australian football, especially as we're looking at things being restructured next year. So this is the final AFC Cup there will ever be, which let us all shed a tear for that, because I love this tournament, and that is a big old shame. But with ACL 2, I'll get used to the name. It's going to be restructured. It's going to be different, and the competition's going to be more fierce. Like, it's a lot of teams that were in ACL this year. They're going to be dropping down and playing in ACL 2 next year. How important is it for the Mariners to win this, not just for them and for their potential treble this year, which is an astounding achievement, but what does it mean for Australian club football internationally?
I think it's enormous. I think it's enormous because, the fact that they're already kind of playing in the ACL Elite next season by virtue of the fact that Wellington aren't eligible to play. So they're going to be in there. I think it gives a club like the Mariners, and more importantly, for Australian football, it makes it more of a destination club in terms of you're not somewhere that you go to finish your career, And I think if you look at what they've done for Marco Tullio, prime example, they picked him up through good scouting when he was on the outer, and they brought him in and said, "Hey, come here. We can help you turn your career around. We can give you a platform. It's a great place to live, so you'll enjoy being here and you'll enjoy your football again, which is crucial. And you help us, we help you." And I think players around the world that they target now will go, actually, I know who this team is now. They're not just a place where you can go where you finish and you're 35 and that stands for Australian football in general. I think if you look at the amount of young talent that comes through Australian football now that's heading off over to Europe, there's going to be a lot more that go in the off season in a few weeks' time, couple of months' time. So I think for Australian football, if they were to win this competition, it gives something to the national footballing pyramid that says, hey, this is not just Australia. Like we've got Asian trophies, we've got continental trophies. How many other teams can say they've got that? How many other teams can say, oh, who are the reigning champions of this tournament? The Australian team. You go, oh wow, like which Australian team? Well, let me know a bit about them. And before you know it, they start looking into the club, they start looking into some of the players that play in the A-League, and then if they see, for example, talented Brazilians at the Mariners, you go, that's quite cool. Like, everybody loves a Brazilian footballer. You see that and you think, oh well, like, they're playing in this level of football, so it must be good. Now, rightly or wrongly, some people say, oh yeah, but depending on the types of players you get, are they past their best or are they there? Are they just kind of there for a payday? That's always going to happen in every kind of league that isn't the top 3 or 4 leagues in the world where they're paying good money, right? So, but I think for the Mariners, specifically for the Mariners, it just gives them this extra leap and step away from being the club that we were talking about 10 minutes ago, where they were being questioned about going out of business and having their license revoked and having Usain Bolt on trial with them. So I just think it gives Australian football this, the Socceroos did it really well at the 2022 World Cup. They kind of reminded everybody that, hey, we actually produce good footballers here. Like they're not just, plodders who are going to try and secure a 0-0 and progress through the group stage by virtue of not losing. They're trying to attack teams. And the more that people can see talented players like Josh Nisbet, for example, or Max Ballard is another one who's probably going to be leaving in the off-season. The fact that they can look at this competition and other fans and clubs and scouts and talent scouts can look at these teams and go, I saw him in the AFC Cup. This kid can play. He's a very good player. Whether he ends up in the K-League or the J-League or wherever it may be, or if he big money moves to Saudi Arabia for something like that. But it just gives the Mariners and it gives Australian football a massive, massive jetpack on their back, which can rocket them to another level. And I think it gives them more prestige. It gives them more kudos to say, we deserve our place in the ACL Elite, and we're going to make a good fist because we've had these players, we've moved them on, we found more, the production line is keep going, and we're just going to keep challenging and we're going to keep pushing ourselves. Listen, they probably won't win the ACL Elite next year. You never know, but the talented players and the clubs with mega budgets they're up against makes it unlikely. But at least it gives them that extra step towards being able to compete and not just be there to make up the numbers, which I think is the criticism that a lot of people have had about Australian teams in the Asian Champions League in the past, is that they're not really there to cause damage. They're not there as a danger. They're there as just a kind of, let's see how they can do and progress. But I think this is what a win in this competition would do for the Mariners.
Yeah, and it's something that an East team hasn't won this in a long time. In fact, the only ASEAN team to do it was JDT, and what that propelled them on to do afterwards, honestly, kind of can't be measured, because I think JDT is in a completely different stratosphere now from when they won this back in 2015. And so I think, to me, that shows what you can do when you win this tournament and what it can do for a club, because JDT is synonymous with ACL now, and that wasn't the case when they won this back in 2015. And again, sadly, this is the last time we'll have this competition, but especially stepping up to ACL Elite next year, you can see the progression for the Mariners. So hopefully that's something that we can see take place. And with all of that in mind, the final question that I have for you here is that if they do this, look, the final series playoffs are always a bit of a crapshoot. I personally love playoffs. I'm an American, so it's just in my blood. But they're the league champions. Let's face it, they're the league champions. If they win this final, and we can come back to the final series, but like if they just win the Premiership and AFC Cup, does that put them in the top 1 or 2? Where does this put them as like the greatest Australian clubs in a single season?
Well, it's a really good question. I think, me personally, I think it has to go up there as the top, because unless you win, there are plenty of teams that have done the double, that have won the Premiership and won the Championship. Now, the fact that, and the reason I think it puts them at the top is because they've proven they're the best team across the course of the season, which for me, as an Englishman, is the ultimate test. Yes, it goes to one-off games, and can you show your nerve in the tactical battle that is a 2-leg knockout tie? They've done that. They've done that in Asia, and they've done that whilst not having to travel from Sydney to Melbourne, Central Coast to Melbourne. They've done that having to travel to Kyrgyzstan and back. They've done that having to travel to India and back. They've been to Malaysia. They've been to Bali. They've been, this team has just been up and down whilst doing the other bit as well, by the way, whilst doing your day in, day out grind of the A-League and finishing top of the pile in that. They've also balanced it on the budget that club has, and that club does not have a big budget in compared to the likes of Melbourne Victory or Melbourne City or Sydney FC. And they've finished above all of them. And they've played better football than all of them this year, having lost, as I said, their coach, their championship-winning coach, and 4 of their first-team championship winners last year, key players. I think for me, they do the double rather than the treble. They're still up there with the best season an Australian team has had, because, I put a high percentage on winning trophies. And if you walk away the season having won 2 trophies, I mean, what a season that is, not just for the players and for their medal cabinets and their memories, but for the supporters. Because if you look at the supporters, if you're a Mariners fan, you go, yeah, I remember we won the A-League back in, sort of whatever it may be, last season, for example, or 12 years ago when they won the Premiership. But they go, do you remember when we won the double? How many teams can say they've won this double? No other team has won this double. Should the Mariners win this double? And that is what sets them aside from anybody else. They have done something, touch wood if it happens, that no other team in Australian football history has done. And I think that's why it should be ranked as number 1.
It's an exciting prospect, and one that we'll have an answer to very soon. And this is the unfortunate bit for this. The AFC Cup Final, again, this is the last ever one we'll have. It is happening this Sunday, May 5th at 8 p.m. in Oman, which will be, for our fans and friends in Europe, that's 4 p.m. GMT, super friendly, and it's 2 a.m. in Sydney.
It is 2 a.m.
It's a 2 a.m. kickoff in Sydney. But I mean, my thing on that, and I won't go into the whole European football versus Asian football thing. If there are Liverpool fans that are getting up at 4 a.m. to watch a match against Middlesbrough or whoever, and then get up for this game. Go ahead. Come on. Call into work the next day. You can do this. I've seen so many people showing up at a pub at 2 a.m. to just watch round 13 of the EPL. You can do this for a final. I will be up. It's Thai time's much more friendly, so I'll be up for this one. It's 11 p.m. here in Thailand if anybody's wanting to watch that one. It's an unfortunate time, but the final was in Kuala Lumpur last year, so now it's in the West this year. Again, all of this is being restructured next year, but I think the potential of it, whether you're watching live, whether you wake up and see it Monday morning, it could be a very, very big moment for Australian football, for East Asian football in this competition. I think on balance, we need a team from the East to win this competition. It's just been dominated by the West. And then again, the competition's going away, but still putting a final chapter in there of a team from the ASEAN region won this thing again. Like that is a really great way to close out the history of this competition. So I'm not even going to pretend to be unbiased in this one, hoping the Mariners can pull this off. Just give me an East team with that trophy again. And again, that's happening this Sunday if you want to tune in. But for now, that's it for this somewhat brief edition. But we got a lot of things to talk about of the ASEAN game. As always, please remember to head over to wherever you download your podcast and give us a 5-star review. It really, really does help us out quite a bit. And a big thank you once again, James. I don't know the next time we'll do one of these, but thank you for joining almost all AFC Cup campaign long. And we'll have to do one talking just about A-League. But thanks for joining and having all the expertise on all of these matches so far. We'll get you back with the cat next time, right?
Yeah, he's just been my wife has just let him out because the other one was fighting him through the door. So he's just run this way and to the back garden. Ryan, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've loved every second of it, talking about the ASEAN game and the AFC Cup, the epic AFC Cup that has 3 different semi-finals that aren't actually semi-finals, and then a final isn't a final as well. So it's been a brilliant journey, man. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks for coming along. And we're talking about it being a double. Really, this would be the quadruple because they're already ASEAN zonal champions, they're interzonal champions, they're premiers, and then they'd be AFC Cup champions. So, and look, if this was in the States, there would be a trophy along the way for all of those. ASEAN zonal champs would have a trophy. It'd be marketed, played by somebody. I won't go into all of that. What I will say instead is that to tune into the next episode, because the next episode is one that's come up kind of out of nowhere, really. It's one I'm really excited to talk about. I'm going to be talking to Alan Rahman about Indonesia's improbable and historic and amazing AFC U23 Asian Cup run that almost got them into the Olympics. So that'll be a really fun one. Then we're going to talk about the Singapore Premier League starting up, the Thai League season's closing soon. As always, it's a very exciting time in ASEAN football. But for now, from Bangkok, it's bye for now.